Mr. Speaker, Jim Collinson is a former chair of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee. He's an eminent Manitoban, Mr. Speaker, who chaired the World Heritage Committee for 2 terms, during which time they considered applications with respect to some very sensitive designations of UNESCO World Heritage sites, including Auschwitz, the panda reserves in China, and Australia's Queensland rainforest, Mr. Speaker. When asked by our caucus to comment on the issue of the possibility of UNESCO designation, World Heritage designation, for the east side of Lake Winnipeg and the potential impact of a transmission line on such a designation, he replied that there would be no impact on such an application from a transmission line, and in fact, the existence of a transmission line would neither guarantee nor not guarantee the ultimate success of any UNESCO application, Mr. Speaker. This is an eminent Manitoban, a former chair of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee, Mr. Speaker, and he says, and I quote, "Using the World Heritage threat and associated arguments as a basis for relocating the transmission line west of Lake Winnipegosis is not based on fact." Mr. Speaker, another one of the Premier's phony arguments for his West Side Daffy Detour has fallen by the wayside. Shame. Why is he throwing away $1.5 billion without having done his homework?
The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite uses the term basis of a decision. There's a number of factors that go into a direction, Mr. Speaker, and if he sometimes uses one and says that is the reason, and he uses another one another day and says that is the reason or the basis, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order.
You're
Order.
the leader now.
Order. Order. The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there was just a report out yesterday from the Ontario Environmental Commissioner talking about the need to be extremely careful on the management, including the transmission lines, of the boreal forest in northwestern Ontario. It talked about this issue of being of international ecological importance. It was the last intact boreal forest, Mr. Speaker, in North America. It talked about its relative value to Canada being some $93 billion, Mr. Speaker. A few days ago, we pointed out that the province of Alberta, after they tried for 3 years unsuccessfully to get licensed a transmission line from Calgary to Edmonton, the new position of the utility, Mr. Speaker, is that you have to not only consider costs, but also environmental considerations in the siting of a transmission line. Dare I say, that's even in the highly developed area and corridor between Calgary and Edmonton. As I say, there's another report out dealing with the sensitivity of the boreal forest. And, Mr. Speaker, I would point out that, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite talks about a straight line, Mr. Speaker, and we certainly acknowledge that a more circuitous route is more expensive, but if a straight line eventually leads to the cancellation of hundreds of millions of dollars in sales to other markets, well, members opposite wouldn't know anything about that because they've never sold a megawatt to Minnesota, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he is the one who's provided the buffet of reasons for the decision, and every single one of those reasons, when it's examined up close, falls by the wayside. So UNESCO applications are no longer a credible reason for it. He talks about protection of boreal forest. His government has just put forward a licensing application to plow a highway through the boreal forest, Mr. Speaker. And so I want to ask the Premier how many phantom protesters have applied now to appear before the licensing body so that they can fight to the death the highway that they're now proposing to plow through the boreal forest, the winter road application that they've now got on the books of the Clean Environment Commission through the very same so-called pristine boreal forest, Mr. Speaker. He just simply doesn't have a leg to stand on. He's throwing away $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion debt to be left to future generations, compromising their ability to build hospitals and schools, requiring them to work longer hours, Mr. Speaker, for the same pay. So the UNESCO argument falls by the wayside. Elijah Harper and Brian Schwartz say that East Side is the way to go. MKO chiefs representing the majority of communities on the East Side say their support for an East Side line. Excel Energy, the biggest buyer of power from Manitoba, says they're not concerned about where the line goes. 8 prominent professional engineers say please reconsider the decision, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
And now the former chair of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee is saying that you can have a UNESCO site and a transmission line, Mr. Speaker. They're putting forward an application to plow roads through the boreal forest, so that argument is nonsense, Mr. Speaker. Why doesn't he come clean and tell us the real reason why they're throwing away $1.5 billion?
The Honourable First Minister.
What's that?
Yesterday was $1 billion. Last week was $500 million.
Mr. Speaker, the member yells louder and embellishes the numbers even more every day.
Order. 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 The Honourable First Minister.
Yes, and Mr. Speaker, at the invitation of governors from the Midwestern states and with many utilities from the Midwest in attendance, including crucial people from the perspective of Manitoba Hydro, it was pointed out, in fact, there was presentations made where the environment was a zero consideration for utilities dealing with energy 10 years ago and 5 years ago, and now it is equal to or as important as rates and reliability in terms of public opinion for customers that we're dealing with. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, you talk about Mr. Schwartz and Elijah Harper. We are not promising the yellow brick road, free road, that Hydro has now said would be separate from if they ever built a line on the east side because of the issue of remoteness. The members opposite also should know that the proposed east side road, not the yellow brick road, the phony road the members opposite are supporting, and which never has been part of the Hydro plant. In fact, we had to have 80 meetings. The member from Rupert's Land and I and many others went to 80 meetings to say that it was never part of the Hydro plan to include ownership of the Hydro line or building of the so-called yellow brick road that members opposite had mythically promised on the east side. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the road on the east side is going down or going up. And this is a strange thing for members opposite. There's an existing winter road that goes up many of those communities. That's where the proposed all-weather road is proposed by our government. It is already an existing site for most of those communities, Mr. Speaker.